All right, good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. All right, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. And I love, this is my favorite one. What does an ocean do? Shh. That cool? Yeah. All right. I hope everybody's enjoying the wonderful dinner that's been prepared for us. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Senator Ben Allen has been representing the 26th Senate District since 2014. He's been a leader in California on many environmental issues, including chairing the Senate Environmental Quality Committee and co-chairing the Environmental Caucus. He co-authored California's historic climate change legislation that paves the way for 50% of California's energy to come from renewable resources by 2030. He's done so much more, which you can read about in his bio. Well, Senator Allen has also supported environmental and climate literacy in K-12. In 2017, he authored a bill that secured $4 million, which is now being invested in environmental literacy projects through our county offices of education. Yahoo! It goes on. In 2018, he co-authored, along with now State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond, legislation that amends the education code to ensure that all public school students have the opportunity to become environmentally literate. SB 720 does many things to advance using the environment as an engagement strategy for students. Here are just three things. First, the legislation codifies California's environmental principles and concepts as the state's definition of environmental literacy. They're already embedded into our curriculum frameworks approved by the State Board of Education for science, history, social science, and health. Second, the legislation encourages environmental literacy curriculum and learning experiences to be made available on an equitable basis to all students to reflect the linguistic, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity of California. And third, the legislation opens the way for environmental and climate literacy to be infused into pre-service and in-service professional learning, and eventually, we hope, into the credential requirements for teachers and school administrators. So with that, welcome Senator Allen.
Will's giving up our devious plan for further infiltration of environmental literacy into our educational system. So thank you, Will Parish, who's been such a wonderful partner, such a great champion, who's stepped up in so many ways for the environment and for this incredibly important nexus between the environment and the education system here in the state of California. So I want to applaud you and I want to thank you. I think everyone here owes you a round of applause, Will. So I am so happy to be with some fellow travelers who care deeply, deeply about this, about making sure that the next generation is able to, they have the foundation, the tools that they need to address and manage the challenges of climate change. And I'm particularly glad to be here at this campus at UCLA that is the reason why I'm a Californian. My parents are actually here in the audience. My dad got a job here at UCLA as a young scholar in the English and Italian departments here at UCLA. He's someone who, and my mother is here as well, who was a teacher and an artist. So they both instilled in me a deep love for education, for the academy, for research, for the transformative and the liberation that education can give to young people and to our future. But my father also instilled in me a deep love for the environment and a real sense of its vulnerability. He would relax by reading Nature magazine and Scientific American as he would fall asleep at night. He took me on hikes up in the Santa Monica Mountains every weekend when I was a kid, and we'd go down to the beach, and I got a chance to enjoy our ocean and our coastline as well. And I really both developed a real love for our environment, but I think growing up here in Los Angeles with our notoriously terrible air quality, I developed a real sense of the vulnerability of our environment, but also the opportunity that people in government have to help to address our environmental challenges. I was born the very year when Congressman Bielenson helped to establish the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area that set aside an enormous portion of our land up there. He deserves a round of applause. When people ask me about who my political heroes are, a lot of folks like to point to presidents or very prominent people, but I think there are individual members of Congress and legislators who won't be remembered perhaps by in the national history books, but who really made an enormous difference for the young people of this city and this region by ensuring that there would be space here in our city for people to go and find inspiration in nature and in open space. And there's so many elected officials who have done that sort of work in coordination with educators and advocates and activists. And I just aspire to be that sort of elected official. Environmental literacy lies at the intersection of two of my policy passions, as I mentioned. I've served both as chair of our education committee in the state senate, and also now as chairman of our environmental quality committee that oversees the state's climate change policies, our work on toxins and on plastics and waste reduction. I've become really profoundly aware of the importance of their intersection. I used to serve on the school board in Santa Monica, and we have, yeah, there you go. Yep, my guys from Santa Monica, where we've been working really for a long, long time, sometimes pushing against the administration to try to in cooperation. To try to, there's just a lot of inertia. There's a lot of inertia in the system. There's a lot of really hardworking administrators every day who are just trying to keep the doors open and try to just keep the ship afloat, particularly under very difficult financial circumstances half the time. And, we get these great do-gooder environmentalists who want to come in there and shake things up and have some great curriculum and some new programs. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of aggressive advocacy to get our friends in the administration to do the right thing. So, there's no question that if we're going to address the enormous challenges that we have as a species, as a planet, it's going to be up to our young people. It's young people who have led the fight for education and for environmental advocacy. And as a result, it's so important for young people to be really grounded in sound science and environmental policy. And I don't have to explain to anyone here how much our commitment to facts and to science how incredibly important those things are. And how ridiculous it is that here we are in 2019 having to defend science, having to defend data. It's ridiculous. It is so sad to me to see the extent to which sound bites and tweets have come to supersede our commitment to data-based decision-making and science-based decision-making. And it really does underscore, I think, for all of us, how much we have to increase our commitment to education, to climate change education. Now, we're, of course, so impressed by the young people who've been stepping up. You see this. Of course, just today, Time Magazine announced that Greta Thunberg is going to be the Person of the Year for Time Magazine, which is so fantastic. Such a wonderful thing. I mean, there's a 15-year-old who just started out all by herself, striking on Fridays in front of the Swedish Parliament, and she has just become a global icon in such a short period of time. And her courage, her tenacity, her audacity has inspired all of us. And I will say that it's unfortunate that and she shamed us, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's someone who has seen the fact that her future that we are bestowing upon her is not as bright as it ought to be. She realizes that her generation will face the consequences of the decisions that we have made. It's a sad and sobering truth. My niece is actually an undergraduate student here on the campus at UCLA, and I have a little son now, a little 13-month-old baby boy, and I think about the world that we are bestowing upon him and the challenges that we've given to him and to his generation. And in the end of the day, I think Greta recognizes that it's the fact that our generation and previous generations failed to act. And so, in the end of the day, we have to make sure that the next generation has an understanding of the challenges. It involves making sure they understand it. It involves making sure that that they understand the range of challenges. I mean, there really has been so many issues that are going to be hitting national, the national radar screen right around 2050, which is when Gen Z will be taking on leadership roles. We're seeing droughts that will have all sorts of impact, catastrophic storms. Locally every year, we're now seeing a new slate of disasters, from fires to floods. There's a big piece in the front page of today's LA Times about sea level rise and the impact that's going to have on our economy, on our environment, on our tourism sector, on our vibrancy, on our way of life. Now, we're proud, of course, in California to be a global leader in environmental policy. We've set bold standards with regards to clean air, vehicles, climate change. I mentioned that I grew up in Los Angeles. When kids were growing up when the year I was born, 1978, kids in the late 70s were growing up with half of the lung capacity of kids in other parts of the country because of how bad our air was. And anyone who lived in the 1970s remembers they could barely see the Hollywood sign because of our smog levels. And it is an example of how coming together we actually can make a difference, even when things seem daunting. California decided to put in place much more strict vehicle emission standards and pollution standards. And as a result, we not only moved national but global markets. We forced the automobile industry, who kicked and screamed and said this would be the end of mobility, we forced them to come up with better technology to make sure that we had cleaner burning cars. And we now, of course, have double the population and a lot more traffic, but at least we have cleaner air, which is a pretty extraordinary achievement. But it really does recognize, it underscores the fact that when government steps up and actually imposes important regulations, it can make a big public health difference on people. And that, of course, that really was the effort of, that was a result of activists and advocates and educators working together with people in government. And of course, California continues to play an important leadership role. We're decarbonizing our energy sector by 2045. We reached our 2020 emissions targets, those strict targets that have been laid out by Senator Pavley under AB and SB 32. We reached those emissions targets 4 years early, and we're proud of that. We also doubled down during recession, with strong environmental goals, which is a hard thing to do. I mean, there are times, especially when times are tough economically, people sometimes it's a little harder for them to get their head around focusing on environmental protection. But we continue to pass aggressive environmental policies. And despite those critics who warned that this would kill business in California, we now boast the 5th largest economy in the world as the state of California. We just surpassed the United Kingdom, mainly because of Brexit, of course. But nonetheless, we've continued to grow. I wouldn't say in spite of, but I would actually say because of the strong environmental policies that we put in place, because people see California as a shining light for the future, as a place where they can come and build green businesses and innovate and in ways that will be beneficial for our environment. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to continue this leadership role. And I'm working very, very much right now on the issue of waste reduction and plastics, single-use plastics reduction. And an enormously important issue that we have to get our head around. It's something that is not only drowning our environment and our seas and our rivers and lakes, but it's also impacting local government's ability to do its work. Something like $500 million alone is being spent within the state of California by our local governments on waste cleanup. And that doesn't even get into the issue of landfill management and the fact that the bottom has fallen out on our recycling industry because China has decided that they don't want our junk anymore. We used to send off all of our recycling to China. Of course, we were living a lie because a lot of this stuff was ending up being incinerated in rivers and lakes there. Finally, as a result, the Chinese government said enough is enough. We're not going to take this waste anymore from California and from the United States. And it's why we now have to get our head around really serious waste management. We have become addicted to single-use plastics. This is something that wasn't even a thought 50 years ago. People live very happy lives with glass and aluminum and porcelain and plates, and now we've created this throwaway culture that is creating impact on our future that it is really appalling. I mean, the fact that we're creating items that are ending up in our environment that will be around 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years from now, just because someone wants to drink a drink one time, and that item will never go away. Or worse, it will go away by being broken up into microplastics that end up in our fish and in our ecosystem, and then in our own bodies, because of the fact that it's ended up in our environment. So it's a terrible situation. So we need a comprehensive approach. We've promoted, we're now really trying to get across the finish line SB 54, which is a bill that would seek a comprehensive solution to this waste management challenge, to say to our Cal Recycle department, do something similar to what we did with our greenhouse gas and climate change goals, task the agency with reaching aggressive waste reduction goals and making sure that every single one of our single-use products will now be manufactured with a mind toward recyclability, compostability, biodegradability, reusability, and not just technical recyclability, but real recyclability. A lot of these items that are being sold that they claim are compostable or recyclable are only compostable under, at 1,000 degrees in one factory in Leipzig. But the fact of the matter is, they're not actually getting biodegraded. They're not getting composted. They're not being recycled. And so one of the things we have to do is provide more producer responsibility associated with the collection and circularity of those items in the end of the day. So these are the kind of big picture thinking. This is the type of big picture thinking that we're proud of engaging in here in the state of California. It's the only way, of course, that we'll ever be able to address the challenges of climate change. We can't view each policy problem in isolation. Integration and cross-sector collaboration is the only way that we will be able to adequately confront these issues. And ultimately, this is at the heart of what we're trying to do here with regards to environmental literacy. We need environmental community and educator leaders working together to ensure that the next generation of our students learn about climate change. They understand the challenges that we have. And if we needed any more reasons to be proud of California, this summit that we have here today gives us a prime example of how we need to, and we will continue to lead the way, setting our goals to educate 500,000 high school students a year to be literate in environmental and climate change issues and solutions. We passed groundbreaking legislation in this area back in 2003. The legislature passed its first major environmental educational law in creating the environmental principles and concepts. This curriculum, we have some leaders who were involved with that effort. This was a curriculum, as you all know, that encompasses sustainability, water, air, energy, forestry, oceans, resource conservation, and recycling. And of course, the Department of Education, our statewide Department of Education, then created the California Regional Environmental Education Community Network, which is this professional development and resources for teachers, outdoor learning experiences, environmental field trips. Many of you, I'm sure, were able to take advantage of the resources that were in that program. And as Will mentioned, we were able to work together on SB 720, which ultimately integrates environmental principles into curriculum updates for English, for science, for history, for health. The idea is that we're going to be more intersectional. It's going to create a more comprehensive educational system. So now when students learn about the history of the gold rush, they'll also learn about the environmental impact of mining and what that, the damage that caused. And it's a wonderful thing to think about the legacy of these old guys panning for gold, but when you actually look at the real impact of the gold rush, the real environmental impact that happened about 20 years later with strip mining and the chemicals and the mercury that we're still trying to get rid of in the streams up in the Sierra, it's an opportunity for students to understand the way that history integrates with environmental science and the way that political decisions and engineering decisions have had a lasting impact, a negative impact on future generations in a way that hopefully will drive home a message with young people. The idea is that integrating environmental concepts into the broad range of of K through 12 curriculum will give our students a deeper understanding of the way that climate change has both shaped the past and also the future. And so what we need to do now is continue the state's investment in these efforts. I am proud to remind people, I'm not just going to announce it, but folks here have been involved with the effort that we were able to get $90 million in grants in the 2019 state budget for students to become teachers, $37 million in grants for professional development for teachers, and we made sure that there's an important environmental advocacy, environmental education aspect to that. I mean, ultimately, it's about training strong teachers, making sure that we're getting more and more of our best and brightest into the teaching workforce and making sure that they have the sorts of tools that they need to become strong environmental advocates and environmental educators. So, you know, this is an all hands on deck effort. I mean, and I just can't thank the people in this room enough for the dogged advocacy, the relentless leadership. I just see so many people here who I recognize who have been people who have been willing to, you know, ruffle some feathers and sometimes, you know, have some tough conversations with people in power in your school boards, with your administration, with legislators, with elected officials, with your parent leaders, with your students, to make sure that they know how important it is for us to have a stronger environmental education system in place for our young people. And so I want to thank you for all that you have done, but more importantly, for all that I know that you will do to help to continue to push this effort. I want to also encourage you to continue to keep the pressure up on Sacramento, on elected officials in Washington, in Los Angeles, in downtown. You know, we need to continue to hear from you. There are a lot of advocacy groups out there that are advocating for every single interest under the sun. I mean, I've got, you know, the plastic surgeons battling with the cosmetic surgeons. We've got the podiatrists who want to work further up the leg. You know, we've got the, you know, this is the kind of thing that the legislature spends a lot of time working on, right? We got all these special interest groups that are just battling with each other all the time. You know, the nurses are fighting against the doctors, and they're fighting against the hospitals and the insurance industry and the pharmaceuticals, but they all lock arms to fight against the trial lawyers, you know. So this is what my life is filled with, these crazy battles of turf and scope of practice and power battles. And in the end of the day, you know, sometimes we lose sight of what's actually really important. You know, this is part of how we've undervalued and underinvested in the University of California and in our K through 12 system, because there's other things that have taken priority, prisons and you know, all sorts of other obligations that have, you know, benefited from certain organized, powerful interest groups. And in the end of the day, we need to organize, and the environmental movement needs to organize, our education community needs to organize, and just keep a relentless drumbeat, because the stakes are so high. The stakes are so high. So on behalf of my constituents, on behalf of those of us in the legislature who care about the environment, and in deep gratitude on behalf of my son, you know, in his generation, I just want to thank you for your relentless advocacy, and I want to ask you deeply, from the bottom of my heart, to keep up this effort. Don't ever stop. The stakes are high. Our future is at stake. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do for education and environment. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, that was so great, Senator Allen. Another applause for Senator Ben Allen, please. Thanks. Thanks very much.